absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you so much to our veterans, to our sponsors, and for each of you for taking time out of your schedule to be here today. When I was asked to speak on this topic a couple months ago, I am reminded of one of my very favorite quotes of all time. And it's by a gentleman whose name is George MacDonald. And his quote is, "To be trusted is a higher compliment than being loved." And I thought, wow. And I can remember when I was a young officer in the military, or when I worked in Fortune 100 companies or for the NSA, we all want to be liked, right? We all want to be a valued part of the organization. But that quote really struck me. And as I think about ethics, and as we all grow our businesses and are in positions of responsibility and climb the leadership ladder, what our folks really need from us is trust. And to do that, we have to be making the right decisions. And to make the right decisions, we have to be really critical thinkers and analyzing and ethical decision makers. We also have to be able to identify, as Kathy kind of noted, when stuff isn't quite right, when there's people that we perhaps shouldn't trust or people that are in the organizations that we may need to clean house. And then lastly, we need to know, our people got to trust us that we are going to build an integrous organization. And so I'm just delighted that this group is all like ilk, that this is really important to you, because boy, I'll tell you, in this day and age, ethics is integral part of excellence. And I hear a lot of great organizations that really talk the talk about, hey, we got great people, we value our people, but from an ethics perspective, they're not walking the walk. And all we have to do is turn on the TV or the news or get on any of these blogs and see. It is letdown after letdown so often, so I often wonder why does it surprise us anymore? So today, in the brief time that we have together, I am reminded of a story that I heard, and they had a professor, and he was an ethics professor, and he invited one of the students to come on down to the front of the classroom, and he gave her a glass full of water to hold. And he took her arm, and he shook it back and forth, and of course water spilled out of the glass. And he looked at her and he said, "Excuse me, why did water come out of the glass?" And her response to him was, "Because you shook my arm." And the professor said, "Nope." And he shook her arm again, more water came out of the glass, and he said, "Why did water come out of the glass?" And she said, "Because you shook my arm." And he said, "No." And he did it one last time, and he said, "Think. Why did water come out of the glass?" And she thought for a minute, and she looked at him and she said, "Because it's what was inside." All right? So ethics is all about what's inside us. Sometimes we sit there and say, well, it's because this happened, it's because of this event. But the outcome, there's a formula, E plus R equals O. The events plus your response is what equals the outcome. And I think a lot of times with these huge failures of the greatest people, the least person we'd expect from bad behavior, it's because it's what was inside them. So today, I want to share some things with you. I get asked a lot as a leadership expert, Tracey, how do we raise leaders? I think in addition to being ethical, we want to be leaders. Because what good is being a leader if you don't have a strong sense of ethics? And I get asked that, how do we raise leaders? The response is, we train people of character and conviction. History raises leaders. So everything that we pour into ourselves and our team is then going to be put into the fires of real world experience. And that's where you're going to come out with either pure water inside or some really nasty behaviors, and hidden character malformations are going to rise up. So it's important to remember that when people are talking about ethics. Ethics is about your inner landscape. And I can't control anybody else's inner landscape, but I can control mine. So today, I want to share with you some ways to create a virtuous circle. And these are 3 questions. We're going to have a lot of different tools, techniques, frameworks, and books for you to go ahead and take note of so that you can go back to your organization and bring them. So there's 3 questions that every leader needs to ask themselves. The first question is, how do I make decisions? How do we come to get clarity on what the real issue is? Are we good critical thinkers? One of the things that I read a lot of research, I'm working on a doctorate in leadership, is that we are losing the fine art of critical thinking, okay? And you can't be a strategic thinker unless you're first a critical thinker. Because in the news cycle, and we're highly reactionary, we believe everything we're told, and we are losing our ability to discern opinion from fact. And so the first thing is, we as leaders need to really research how do we make decisions. And although our ethics are grounded, there's different things, as you know, in the different regulatory, environmental, diversity, different things that affect that. Second, who is telling the truth, okay? This is a very important concept because when you go to get input from people, we can't see in people's hearts, okay? We're not God, but we have to be able to use discernment to judge who can we trust and who can we not trust. I have watched so many great leaders, myself included, that have gone and made the wrong decision because I got input or I trusted what somebody said that I should not have. Lastly, we're going to talk about what we can do as an organization to really cultivate an integrous organization and how we build this into people so they act independently. I can remember when I went to the Air Force Academy, we had the honor code. And when you would go up the Bring Me Men ramp, and it said, "I will not lie, cheat, or steal, nor tolerate those who do." So it wasn't just about me keeping my nose clean, but it was about me, self-awareness, self-directed in how to monitor and let people know, just like Kathy did, hey, something's amiss, all right? So we're going to talk about, as we get started, I'm going to share something with you about, okay, how do we become better thinkers, okay? Because you're like, Tracy, I got it, I'm sold, I need to be a better thinker. I'm going to give you 3 frameworks to help you become a better thinker. So first of all, group think stinks. I say this because when I think I've got the smartest, most independent thinkers on my team, just remember, as people, we are flawed. We have our own biases, assumptions, and blind spots. No matter how objective we try to be, it is a constant struggle to really get clarity and be aware of your own judgments and biases. How many of you have ever heard of the Ash conformity experiment? Okay, you can look it up on YouTube. It's an incredible video. This happened in the 50s. And this gentleman, this researcher, he took 6 individuals and he brought them into a room and he said, I want you to look at this drawing and I want you to tell me which of the exhibit on 1 is most like exhibit 2. Well, how many of you guys would say A is the correct answer, right? Okay. In this experiment, what he did is he had 5 guys, 5 out of the 6 were what they call ringers. In other words, they were in on the research. And he told them, pick B or C. One individual was a true test subject and had no idea what was going on. He just came in and thought, so, you watch this video. All of the other people, and they had, I think the guy that was the real test subject, I think he was number 4, number 5, and you watch this video. Number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4 did not say A, they said B or C. Guess when it got to number 5? Guess what percentage of the time that number 5 went along with everybody else? 37% of the time, okay? So when you were looking for input in your organizations or on your teams, always remember that we unconsciously have this bias, and there's a lot of research as to why that happens. But when they took one of the ringers and said, I want you to give the correct answer, guess what it went down to? 5%. So a lot of times when I'm in a trustee meeting or a board meeting and everybody's like, yes, 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 all in favor say aye. What were we even talking about? I almost want to put a ringer in the audience to automatically argue the counterpoint, be the devil's advocate. So in the event somebody else is thinking, you know what, I'm not sure if we have really examined this and done our due diligence, so they have the courage to speak up. As we talked about courage, some of us have no problem saying, wait a minute, being the lone wolf and saying, no, that's not right. Other times, you know, it's not so comfortable for people. It doesn't mean they're less than ethical. Part of that is our self-efficacy. Part of that is our personality. Part of that is, are we extrovert? So a lot of times, if you get into a critical thing where you really need everybody's input, pull a couple people aside and say, I want you to argue the counterpoint so you can make sure and you can eliminate a lot of this bias. All right, so managing complexity. The critical thinking progress. Leaders manage change, okay? We manage the vision. Managers manage complexity. And typically when there is an ethics issue, you have to involve the critical thinking process. And what that means is, first of all, you have to get clarity on what the real issue is. How many of you have ever chased down a problem only to find out when you implemented a solution, you did not actually get to the root cause corrective action because you were chasing the wrong thing, okay? There's a book called QBQ. We ask the questions, but then we ask the question behind the question. And for those of you that have done any statistical research, there's a great phrase, and it says, correlation does not equal causation. And I'm on a lot of nonprofit and library books because I love bibliotherapy. And a lot of times when we look at what is going on in society, everybody will say, well, the problem is there's not enough what? Money. Okay? When I know darn well that even if I gave everybody $1 gazillion, that still wouldn't correct the problem. You need to get to the root, and we mean well with social issue, but you got to get to the real issue. Otherwise, you're going to waste a lot of resources trying to solve something. So get there and peel back. Keep saying, get clarity on the issue. And then the process is you gather as much input as possible from different sources, different people. Go out, get test subjects. Read, just don't do your confirmation bias, okay? Just don't assume that you see everything. And then lastly, you want to integrate the information and you want to take an action. That's the whole purpose of it. So scientists now say that there's keys to critical thinking are, if you're seeing red, this is a good thing in critical thinking. The first thing is stop and think. In this day and age, with the 24-hour news cycle, okay, I even had it happen on me to the plane. Tracey, did you hear about the basketball players that got, nope, I did not, okay? Stop and think. We think that we have to respond to everything that happens immediately. This is a very bad habit we need to get out of it. I tell people, take the jerk out of knee jerk, okay? Just go ahead. And you know what? 99% of the stuff that comes across the news or that people ask you about, you don't have to weigh in on it right now. People are just looking for input, okay? Or a reaction. You do not have to say anything. I typically will say, I have not researched that, so therefore I do not know. Now, some people are going to get huffy about it and say, well, don't you care? I care, but remember, my unbelief is not disbelief, okay? Just because, and they say that the test of a first-rate mind is the ability to understand the other person's perspective better than your own, okay? So that's what I always refer back to. So remember, if you are asked to make a decision, really analyze it. Unless, for our veterans, for Neil, unless you're going to war, and boy, you better turn those codes right now, you have time to sit there and think about it. A lot of people, those of you guys that run organizations, somebody will run in with their hair on fire. Oh my gosh, this is, stop and think, okay? And then you want to recognize your assumptions. Psychologists call it BABS. Biases, assumptions, and blind spots. And guess what? We all got them. You know, there's nature and there's nurture, but what fills up our life bucket is our outside experiences. So every experience that you have had goes into this bucket. When you are confronted or faced with information, you are going to process that through the lens of what you have in your own bucket. So it's important that you stop and recognize. This is why they ask on a jury if you've ever had specific incidents, like if you're on a murder trial, has anybody in your life ever been, you know, a victim of homicide? Because you are going to be close to it, and you may not be able to see it objectively. Then you want to evaluate the information, and then you want to draw your conclusions with the plan of action. So that's the baseline critical thinking process. And again, we need to teach our folks this because this is the baseline. Strategic thinking is up here. And a lot of people are like, oh yeah, we're great strategic thinkers. And I'm like, you can't make the big decisions unless you know how to make the little day-to-day operational decisions. So it's very important to teach that. All right. After critical thinking is ethical decision making, or EDM. And critical thinking is impacted by our values. All ethics decisions, and you all know this, are typically in a gray area. In other words, there typically is no 100% right or wrong. Now, I'm not talking about things like if there's murder or crimes that we hand over to the courts. I'm talking about our day-to-day interaction, as we talked about, as Kathy talked about, where maybe it's not illegal, but it's not quite right. Okay, so there is always a component of that critical thinking that obviously her values impacted how she took that into account. And again, with ethical decision making, it's not about just the best thing to do, but it's about the right thing to do. She talked about the Fannie Freddie thing. I remember in 2008 when I was moving back to run the business and everything was falling apart. It was the worst possible time to put a house on the market and come back and start my own business, okay? Why? Because people thought the best thing to do was give $300,000 loans to people making $30,000 a year. How is that the right thing to do, okay? But a lot of people did it. Their temporary gain was more important than people's long-term pain. So ethics is about not just what you're getting out of it, cashing out, but what in the big picture is the right thing to do. And again, it's your judgment. You need to look at your judgment. You need to examine other people's motives. There's always a motive. okay? As pure and righteous as we like to think we are, okay? We really have to watch and keep our egos in check, because you always want to make sure that what you're doing is about serving the institution and not about serving yourself. And we'll talk a little bit about character malformations in the next couple slides, and how do you identify something's not right in the organization and what you need to do about it. Also, emotions. Ethical decision-making typically has to do with emotions. Those people that desperately wanted to own a home, that was an emotional thing for them, okay? So we have to realize that emotions has a lot of play in it. We have to recognize that, and we have to self-regulate our emotions to do the best possible thing for the most amount of people. Lastly, we have to realize that every ethical decision that we make has long-term repercussions. Okay? A lot of times we'll make a decision, and I'm constantly amazed. I do book discussions with our state corrections institutes in Pennsylvania. And I go to 3 different prisons, and we read personal development books. Men, some of them are in for life, okay? They share with me how they did something at an impulse, not realizing that it has a lifetime, literal lifetime effect. So ethical decision making is what you make in the heat of the moment, and even if it's not illegal or immoral and ethical, everything we do has repercussions. And I'm reminded, back in 2013, there's a great article on a site called Good News, which is tremendous every now and then. As you said, a lot of times with ethics, we see only the nasty stuff. But this is wonderful. This was a race held in Spain, and the gentleman in back, his name was Andaya. He was running the race, and the gentleman, he's Spanish, and the gentleman in front, his name was Mutai. He's from Kenya. And the gentleman from Kenya had won a bronze medal in the Olympics the year before. So they're in this race, and the gentleman in front, he misunderstood that the race ended 10 meters back from where it was supposed to. So he slowed down to stop. And the gentleman from Spain was gaining on him, and the people in the stands yelled to the gentleman from Kenya and said, "No, keep going. You're not at the end of the race yet." And the gentleman from Spain was gaining on him, and guess what he could have done? He could have won the race, okay? But he didn't. He put his hand on his back and said, "You need to keep going, you need to finish the race." And his comments are really brilliant, what he said at the end of that. He said, "I didn't deserve to win. I did what I had to do. He was the rightful winner. He created a gap that I couldn't have closed if he hadn't made a mistake. As soon as I saw he was stopping, I knew I wasn't going to pass him." Now that's a real ethical decision. Okay, that is brilliant. And a lot of times we tend in business, we get that killer instinct, I'm going to go, your loss is my gain. That's tough to think in those dichotomous terms as far as black and white, okay? That may get you a short-term victory, but in the end you're going to lose the battle. And it degrades all of humanity when we do stuff like that. So I just thought that was a brilliant story about how to really, not just the best thing to do for the organization, but the right thing to do. So this brings us to now our current world situation, where now researchers are saying that ethical decision-making models are no longer enough, and there's a reason for that. Now we need what's called sense-making strategies. I mean, there is so much in the world right now. It is so convoluted with regulation, with different impacts, with all the different rules that come out, with all the different, what seemed black and white, like when I was growing up, it's not so easy to make a decision anymore. So what they're telling people is how to make sense out of the senseless. And I mean, a lot of things that confront us in business really at times can seem senseless. So a sense-making event is needed when I like what researchers say, it's a vexing set of circumstances. And what that means is something happens and you're like, holy Toledo, I didn't even see that coming, okay? What are we gonna do about this? It's got so many different repercussions and fingers in it, and it spans so many different realms, from human resources to environmental to, oh my gosh, we could wind up on the news. How do we make sense of this? And the paradigm now is that in the past, back in the 80s, we had the scientific management study, and it was pretty cut and dried. Science finds, industry applies, man conforms. Pretty cut and dry. Today, we go into systems thinking, which is more complicated, and we analyze by breaking down social and behavioral components. But going forward, sense-making now, because there's going to be rampant changes in technology. There's two things now that are really changing everything ethically. That now we still keep our core values, but there's other considerations. The human workforce now is so diverse. There's people from all different cultures, all different belief systems, all different walks of life, that we have to incorporate and bring into the organization and account for how they're going to perceive it. Also with the speed of technology. Before you could keep secrets or people didn't know different things that were going on, oh my gosh, stuff is getting recorded and put out there. So the speed of technology means, you know, if you didn't know about it, I'm sure somebody else is going to find out about it. So you want to make sure with the advent of technology and as diverse and complicated as human behavior is now, you almost have to look at a new paradigm, which is sense-making strategy. And there are different things that you can use for the sense-making strategy, but again, it gets on to what is happening. Problem recognition. I get asked to be on different TV shows and radio shows about a lot of bad behavior that goes on, about leaders that should have recognized that something was going on, but for whatever reason didn't. So the first step is really problem recognition. Next, you want to make sure why it's important. This is the most important step, information gathering. Warren Bennis has one of my favorite quotes, and he says, none of us is as smart as all of us. Sometimes, as leaders, when there's something going on, we want to bring in ourselves and our core group, but we need to stop and really make sure that we gather data to enhance our understanding at all different levels, because different people at different levels are going to see different things that we need to incorporate, because everything is so complicated now. You need a lot more data points to really get clarity on what the issue is. And then lastly, how's this going to impact me, okay? Where you need to look at what the decision you're going to make. You need to look as far, and again, as I said it before, there is no true right or wrong. Somebody's always going to come out of this, but you in doing your due diligence and your research are going to make the best possible decision for the most amount of people. You're also going to make sure that you forecast how anything that you do, you're going to take that into account as best you can. So now we talked about the how you think in different ways. Let's talk now about who. Who can you trust? How do you discern authenticity? All right? I look at the word discernment as like wisdom on steroids. You know, you used to look at people and say, oh, that person's really wise. That was pretty good. But discernment is almost like this hyper-intuitive, almost metacognitive thing where you have just grown in, see, that's why I like getting older, because I'm starting to kind of figure it out type thing. So you can discern authenticity. I mean, before I was just kind of like, I believed everybody was always going to do the right thing all the time. So now I'm a little bit smarter, okay? So now I have to discern authenticity, okay? So there's I love Henry Cloud, and one of his books that I read about a year and a half ago is called The Power of the Other. And it's a phenomenal book because in it he says there are 4 quadrants of relationships. And I read this book at a time in my life where I had just been through some professional and personal crises, and I was burnt out on dealing with people. Imagine that. A person that gets paid to motivate people being burnt out on people. Well, that's not going to end out too good, is it, right? This is one of my doctoral colleagues. She's a pastor, and she says, Tracey, she goes, I love people, but people. And I had just really had enough of people, okay? So I was home with my 4 dogs. I was working from home, and my 3 cats. Don't mean to upset the cat people. And I was working from home, and I was studying my doctorate, and I'm like, that's it. I'm putting all my pieces back in the box. I'm going to regress into my own little bubble, and I'm just going to read books and write and play with my dogs and blog. And that's all I need in life. I don't need anybody else. That's not a good situation to be in. And then somehow this book made its way onto my desk, thank God, okay? And I read The Power of the Other. I wasn't burnt out on people. I had the wrong relationships in my life, okay? And when you deal with ethics and when you deal with motivation, and trust me, ethics is very about motivation, because you're going to have the courage, even though you're going to walk in a line of fire, you have to have the courage and the motivation to do the right thing. Henry Cloud said there's 4 types of relationships in this world. 1, no connection. These are your people in your life that maybe you hear from, but most likely you don't. I heard a term, I was reading about it online, they call it ghosting. I don't know if anybody's ever heard that. All of a sudden somebody's your best friend and then they poof, you never see them again, okay? They were a no connection. This is also people in your life or your professional world that you don't ever really know what they're doing, and if you ask them what they're doing, they get huffy with you, okay? They consider that transparency. I consider it secretive, okay? Watch out for these people. I got burned by somebody like this not too long ago. If there's not a connection where people say, I'll tell you what you need to know, that's not an authentic relationship. You need to watch out for that, okay? Number two, the bad connection. These are the people that no matter what you say, what you do, it's wrong, this is never gonna work, you're an idiot, blah, okay? Bad connection, all right? Next is the pseudo-good connection. Equally as bad. These are the syrupy sweet people. These are the people that see you're about to walk off the cliff. It's all going to be okay. And Stephanie, it's going to be great. Okay? Your mom, perhaps, is one of these. Okay? And you know what I'm saying? And I love my mom, but I mean, I need the truth. Okay? I need you to tell me if there's something I'm missing. Okay? These are the ones that after you make a decision and you realize it's going terribly wrong, will sit at the table and say, well, I could have told you that. And you're like, oh, okay. All right. Lastly, what you need is the quadrant 4 connection. These are the people that want your success more than you want it. These are the people that have your back. These are the people that will have the honest conversations with you. These are the people that are going to be there, and they're going to tell you what you need to hear and not what you want and like to hear. They're going to realize that there's a difference between being hurtful and harmful, that I may hurt your feelings temporarily, but in the end I may save your life or your organization or save you from being on the news and everybody making fun of you, okay? You need the true connections, okay? And he breaks these down. So what I realized as I was sitting there for about 30 seconds with my pity party, I shed a tiny little tear, and then I got this book. Because every time, I'm telling you, if you're in a rut or you're down, you grab a book, okay? Because the problems are, if you are feeling in an ethical or whatever rut, it's because you're getting too closed in on yourself. I had tons of relationships in my life, but I didn't have enough quadrant 4. So what I did is I immediately, you heard that I run a second generation business, I contacted my father's friends after 8 years of sitting in the seat and said, hey, I need your help. And you know what? What can I do? Who can I connect you with? I've been waiting for you to ask. I'm so glad you did, okay? And they brought me back to life. Okay, so remember, if you're kind of on the burnout, make sure you need to clear off, because we only have a certain amount of bandwidth. And these other ones, trust me, nothing good is ever gonna. I've worked with people for 40 separate years in all the different industries. This is a constant. Okay, and don't be ashamed about it. You need to dial into the true connections, especially if you're going to be in the realm of working with legal issues, HR issues, ethical issues. You need those quadrant 4, because boy, they are going to give you everything they can, and they're going to have your back, and they're going to be there for you. All right, so character malformations. So I call it the Judas principle. You know, when those people that we had in our inner circle that we trusted the most, all of a sudden we feel something in our back, and it's from somebody. Has that ever happened to anybody in here? Okay, it is tough, and it is unsettling, and it is devastating, okay? So if you've gone through it, the best of us go through it, okay? Don't beat yourself up too hard over it. Call me, and I'll beat myself up for you for it, okay? This is tough to let go of if this has happened to you. But realize, if something like this happens to you, it's called character malformations. I interviewed a pastor out in Hawaii from a huge church, 20,000 members. And he was sharing with me, I said, well, it was for a leadership paper. And I said, what is one of the worst things that ever happened to you? And he explained to me how his second in command, okay? It's like the Knights of the Round Table. It's like Lancelot, and you just watch your inner circle. And I'm not saying be distrustful, but just watch, because we're all human, okay? And we're all flawed. Character malformations. And he said he had this second in command that he was grooming to be heir apparent. Unbeknownst to him, about 3 years prior to that, this second individual was working to peel off on the side and form his own entity. And when he did, he proceeded to take half of the people with them. Okay? And he was just like, I didn't even see it coming. Now, is it wrong to break off and do your own thing? Absolutely not. Is it wrong to not be completely transparent about it? Absolutely. Okay? So what he said to me was, I said, did you not see it coming? And he said he should have. And I have to tell you, truth in advertising, every time that I've had this happen to me, there was something that I knew wasn't right. But I opted for the path of least resistance, and I chose to either hope it would go away. And the problem with character malformations is they don't go away. They're like a cancer, and they'll metastasize in the organization. And every time this would happen to me, I would be thankful, because as much as it hurt, I now could take action and cut it out of the organization. Okay, so character malformations. You need to find out with each of your key players and your underlings, your individual contributors. The bottom line is, are they serving their own ego or the institution? If they're serving their ego, I call them SOBs, which stands for self-oriented behaviors, okay? In the military, we would call them SLICs, for self-licking ice cream cones, okay? It's people that are more concerned with their own benefits, that they don't see the organization, even though you're giving them benefits. That's it. It's all about that. And I read a book called Snakes in Suits, and it's called When Psychopaths Go to Work, and it talks about the percentage of sociopaths that are already decimated something and they move on. I had one like this. I had a snake in a suit, okay? And I tracked his path because, again, with Glassdoor, with LinkedIn, you can find everybody everywhere. I watched this snake go from organization to organization and just wreak at the consummate bully boss. And trust me, I've been yelled at by 4-star generals. I'm not weak, but this guy was nasty, okay? And so you got to find out if they are serving the ego or the institution. Another book by Henry Cloud, Necessary Endings. I would highly recommend your organization read it, because it lets you know, it's like Kenny Rogers says, you got to know when to hold them, you got to know when to fold them. And a lot of times with sticky situations, you got to know, can this person, can this relationship, can this whatever, merger be saved? Or is it sunken costs and I need to cut my losses, I need to go? I think that is one of the most incredible things that a leader can know, when to stay and when to go. So he talks about there's 3 kinds of people in this: wise, foolish, and evil. Wise person, when you confront them with something, they say, oh my goodness, I didn't realize that. I'm sorry, and I'm going to take care of it. Iron sharpens iron, right? These are your quadrant 4 people. I can remember when I was a second lieutenant in the military, and I was trying to act all lieutenant-y, and one of my enlisted guys, my crew chiefs, came up to me and he says, LT, there's no doubt how smart you are, but sometimes the way you come across is really difficult. Well, I could have taken an enemy bullet and that would have hurt less than that, okay? But I was so thankful that he actually said this to me, and it hurt my ego, but I thought, you know what, he's right. Okay? And he taught me the old, people don't care what you know until they know you care. Yes, even in the military, and yes, even during times of war. So wise people, but he was wise enough to come to me. We'll talk a little bit about using your chain. And I was wise enough to then go, you know what? He could have gone to my commanding officer and stopped my career pretty much. But it's all about, you've probably got people in your life that you want to say something to, but you dread saying something to. Why? Because they're going to blow a gasket, right? So you want to make sure that is not a wise person. A wise person is going to be like, man, but they're going to go away maybe for a little bit, and they're going to come back and say, thank you so much, I needed to hear that. It's not what I wanted to hear, but it's what I needed to hear. Next, foolish. These are the people that you're going to tell, and they're going to go on their way for a little bit more, and you're going to have to tell them more than once, okay? These are teenagers. These are, you know what I'm saying? You just have to keep pouring into them, but they can be converted into wise people. It just takes a lot more. I think of all the people that tapped me on the shoulder in my younger days and poured into me when they could have just, and it took me a while to get it, but you'll get it. The third category, and these are the character malformation people. And if you missed it, like I said, don't beat yourself too up. Most of the time, people are very adept at hiding this. And you know what? And don't take it personal. People say, oh my gosh, it's against me. It was always in there. Just because you didn't see what was in that cup doesn't mean it wasn't always there. There just wasn't the correct event to make it bubble and surface. Evil people, no matter what, their goal is to destroy the organization. No matter what, there's going to be no arbitration, no mediation, no coming around, okay? If you have something like this, Henry Cloud recommends you cut it out of the organization, call your lawyer, be prepared for the fight. Because what you want to do, if you let this stick in your organization and hope it's going to go away, it's not going to go away, and it's going to cause grave duress to the other people in your organization. I worked with a school, and they let somebody stay in their organization that was this last category, hoping that somehow it would turn around. It did not turn around. Not only did it not turn around, but it gave the bad person so much more ammunition to ruin and scare everybody else. So I don't mean, you guys are kind of looking, I don't mean to scare you, but ethically, for the health of the organization, because we as leaders do the right thing, we need to defend the flock, and we need to make sure if there are wolves in our organization, or customers or clients, or even experts that come in, do your homework and make sure who you're bringing into your organization. Make sure their motives. There's a Facebook memes and it says, I'd rather eat crumbs with bums than steaks with snakes, okay? You just want to make sure who you're bringing into your fold is who is going to be the true quadrant for. All right, so signed you in your lion's den. As Kathy found out, you can get a letter sent back and get that phone call, and that lets you know that you're in the lion's den. But I tell people, okay, first of all, people, if you've got this kind of less than admirable and ethical behavior going on, people always know, all right? I think of Uber, who just, Travis Kalanick just, I'm not sure if he stepped down or not. You guys aware of that? Really poor behavior in the company. Uber's valued at 7-8 billion, okay? Some really poor behavior, wasn't able to go on in that company for a long time. Horrible behavior. And I, of course, got asked to interview it. What kind of brought it to a head was a young lady had written a letter, just a blog. She had tolerated some stuff and said that's enough. This is the problem when you don't deal with the evil or the bad. The evil's not going anywhere. The good people are going to leave, okay? It's so important. And people will say that to me, well, Tracey, you know, how do you keep the good people? And I said, easy, get rid of the bad. Because the good people are already into your organization and committed. You need to get rid of the bad. Because when they sit there, and again, it gets back to George McDonald and trust. How can they sit there and say, I'm going to do everything I can for you, but I'm going to allow this other behavior to go on? It's a disconnect. So when your Uber goes under, bad behavior, she up-channeled it. Finally, this got momentum and it got brought to the conclusion. So they were asking me about this CEO and, oh, isn't he the worst? And I said, you know what? Everybody knew about this. Entry-level managers, HR managers, C-level managers, the board, and yes, he was chairman of the board, okay? But that doesn't matter. People always know. There was an incident recently where they found out that somebody in one of our organizations was having an affair with the direct report, okay? When this got brought up to the hierarchy, oh my gosh, thank goodness we found it. Nobody knows. I said, trust me. Everybody knows, okay? When you find out, you're the last to know. That's a whole separate issue about why wasn't there transparency and you knew. And sure enough, they did know. Next, we've all heard about, it's not the first time. I interviewed another individual that works at one of the youth groups, and they had found out that one of their counselors had been molesting a minor. Okay, they interviewed the person. So what do we want to do now? Now picture this. Okay, this is before as heightened as we are now. But well, just give him another chance. He told me, Tracey, trust me. When it comes to your attention, it's not the first time. Okay, so just remember that when you are dealing with character malformations, and maybe the first time you see it, but just, and I say this not to scare you or make you overreact, but just to really just check your gut, check your discernment, check your authenticity, and make sure, because typically, and he found out as he went back and looked more into this person's history, because he hadn't done his due diligence when he hired him, this was not the first time. Okay, and I think about what's going on with Harvey Weinstein. Again, it could be anybody. As that came up, but oh, now, how many people come out every day? Wow, how long has this stuff been going on? But you see, when you have $8 billion valuation, or you see Academy Awards, people get really weird and dirty when fame or fortune tends to override their moral compass. Okay? And this has nothing to do about morality. This is just about being a decent human being. You need to watch it, you need to let people know, I don't care what it does to our bottom dollar, I don't care what, you need to expose it and you need to route it out. Now you may be thinking, Tracey, how does all this stuff keep happening? Every time you turn on the news now, there's more bad behavior. And there's a great book called The Contrarian's Guide to Leadership. And it's by a man whose name is Dr. Stephen Sample. And he was the 10th president of USC, and he was the president from 1991 up until 2010. He passed away last year. He's a hero of mine. And he says that the reason this stuff happens, even if you as a founder, us in this room, I know we got our act together. I know our hearts and our regular, I know we enforce it. We'll go to bat for anybody. We route it out. But how do you make sure all your underlings down 5, 6 layers down, how do you make sure that they also are as committed as those at the top, that they own it? And he said that when we hire people, there is a tendency for A people to hire A minus, for A minus to hire C, for C to hire D, and for D to hire F. Okay? Now, I don't think people intentionally mean it. Sometimes we need to fill a spot, just hire anybody, and I tell people, when you want it bad, that's how you're gonna get it, okay? So I wanna remind people, it is much better to have an open seat than a poor fit, because you're kicking the can down the road and you're letting somebody into the fold of your beautiful organization that you haven't properly vetted. So he talks about that. Just let people be aware of that, okay? Because the only way the people that are the individual contributors have that is if you really hire them. What do they say? Hire for character, train for skill. Okay? You know, they tell us we're all going to be replaced by robots anyways, okay? So who cares about skill in the next 20? But integrity and character, no robot's ever going to replace that, okay? So you want to make sure that people are aware of this, and you keep hiring people that really have that same integrous attitude as you do. Okay? So now, the last point is, how do we cultivate these? Okay, Tracey, I got these people in. What can I do to help my people understand that ethics, they can be taught ethics, and that ethics is part of their responsibility? You can't just say, it's like I said at the Air Force Academy, nor tolerate those who do. How can you trust and build people that they at the lowest level will say, hey, Amanda, there's something going on. Thank you for telling me that, okay? As a boss, the worst possible thing, I can remember I lost one of my most brilliant technicians, and he walked off and said, listen, I wanted to come say goodbye to you, but one of your direct underling is the worst thing ever. And I was like, why didn't I know sooner, okay? How do you cultivate that so there are no surprises, so you're good people? And so, at least he told me, a lot of times people will just walk off and go, oh no, everything's fine. Trust me, people never leave jobs. People always leave bad bosses, okay? So you want to make sure and remember that. So to cultivate the inner landscape, remember, motivation is the portal to people being engaged in ethics. Again, another great book for those of you that have read it, Good to Great by Jim Collins, phenomenal books. He states that we in organizations need to have what we call a culture of discipline. That means if you have a culture of discipline, the higher your culture of discipline, the less rules and regulations you need. And I can remember one time I tried to get rid of an employee for a terminable offense, and I was told by HR, you can't because you don't have a policy letter on it. Okay, so this is the type of environment that we're dealing in. It always struck me as weird why I have to have spelled out all the nasty behavior, looking at porn at work, having sex in the office. You know, why do we have to have policies for this? Is not this, I mean, I'm sorry, I just gotta say, is this not, don't bite each other, don't steal from each other? Does this not, don't slam each other? Is this not basic human decency? Do I actually have to have am I dealing with 6-year-olds? Do I actually have to have a regulation? Well, in a great organization, the answer is no. Okay, because people, and you see the ethic of entrepreneurship, that doesn't mean that you're not working in a big organization, okay? What that means is that each individual employee considers themselves a free agent and a representative of the company, okay? In teaching and learning, what they want adults to be as adult learners, in andragogy, they want us to be self-directed learners, okay? And you know, when you get to adulthood, you ought to have the initiative to start controlling your own destiny, your own learning, and your own sense of ethics. In a great organization, you have people that say, you know what, I own this organization, and if there's something ethically not cool, I'm going to elevate it. And number 2, they have a strong culture of discipline. You know, I read a couple articles on the definition of theft. I think I heard it on NPR, and some people were saying, well, is it really stealing if you use the company card for a tank of gas when after all you had to work a couple extra hours that you didn't get compensated for? And so we get into this weird realm of, well, I remember when I went in for my my clearances when I worked for the NSA, and the first thing they sat down and said was, have you ever broken the law? And of course I'm like, absolutely not, you know? And they're like, okay, you ever roll through a stop sign? You ever go over the speed limit? And I said, well, yeah, but I didn't know you were talking about those laws, the little laws. I thought you were talking about the like murder, you know, the big 10 commandments, well, not all the 10 commandments, but like some of them. No, okay? So this is really about the culture of discipline. Man, even if nobody sees it, even if nobody knows, you got it tight, okay? You want to run a tight organizations and let people know. And then we want to police each other. You know, if people really were self-directed reporters or self-directed ethicists, then we as managers could go on to looking at the big picture rather than trying to clean up everybody else's messes. Teach people that, hey, I rely on you to do the right thing when I'm not here. And that in that Good to Great has a lot of different things, how you can build that culture of discipline. Next, there's a great book, imagine that, another book I read, called The Power of Followership by Robert Kelly. Okay, so all I'm studying is leadership, leadership, leadership. And the fact of the matter is, you can't be a leader if you don't have followers, okay? You can't. And they now say that leaders are about 20%, but the followers are about 80%. And I have a new book out for millennials, and they all tell me, how do I become a great leader? And I say, become an exemplary follower. You can get online when you go back to your organization. Robert Kelly has a free PDF, and you can find out what type of follower people are. This is imperative. There's 5 types of followers. Number 1, in the bottom left-hand side, that's passive. That means they're not engaged, and they're not critical thinkers, okay? That means you have to follow up on them to make sure that they did what you told them to do. And by the way, they could see somebody stealing blind, they could see a thief, and they won't say anything. Passive, not good, okay? Number 2, on the right-hand side of it, this is the conformist. These are the I only have good things to say to you. Oh, they're engaged, but they're not critical thinkers. Not every idea I come up with is great. I need somebody to push it back and go, Tracey, that's ridiculous, okay? But these are the people that are gonna go, what do you want me to do? You want me to do something wrong? I'll do it for you, okay? These are the colluders type thing, you know. You commit the crime, I'll lie about it what you can. So these are the conformists, okay? The pragmatic survivors. These are people that are kind of engaged in what's going on and kind of critical thinkers, okay? So they're kind of in that, you know, sometimes I'm with you, sometimes I'm not. Alienated, okay? These are the people that are really high critical thinkers, but they'll never get engaged in the solution. You got any of these in your group? Okay? All they want to do is point out the problems, and they're management bashers. And I'm not saying that they sometimes call them deviants in the professional world, not like social deviants, but they're kind of radical thinkers. I love the radical thinkers, but if you can't engage in part of the solution, you're just a pain in my butt, okay? So you want to make sure that people that are alienated, yes, I value your opinion. Find these people and give them a voice, because you can't shut them up. Okay, but find out how you can turn all that negativity into something positive, and the effective followers. And you know what? You don't have to sit down and say, hey, Jordan, what kind of a follower you are? Take the test. Okay, and you'll find out. And if you have people that test high in the effective follower, they expect you to trust them. They expect you to take it serious when you bring ethical violations to them. They expect you to give them a lot of latitude to make they own it. They're your co-leaders, okay? So you want to sit down with your organization and find out who is that and what you can do with them to get them more engaged. And you also want to know who the other people are too, who you're dealing with, because your leadership style is going to reflect what kind of follower you handle. Okay? Conflict resolution. There is a big difference between peacekeeping and peacemaking, okay? After the first Gulf War, I kept going back to all my different places because we were in a peacekeeping, right? The same places, we just fired off a lot of ammunition. Now, we're just there as a show of force. We've got nothing to settle anything, it's peacekeeping, okay? But who is blessed? The peacekeepers? No, the peacemakers. There is a big difference in your organization between peacekeeping is a false solution. It's everybody just shut up. You know, it's sometimes a parenting technique. Y'all just go to your room and work it out. Guess what? Nothing gets worked out. It just gets worse. Sometimes if you have conflict going on between different silos in your organization, please don't ever tell them to just go work it out. It's not going to work it out. That is peacekeeping. It's a fake détente. Okay, and somebody's going to cross the line and bad things are going to happen then. Peacemaking is when you unpack it. You hear all the sides out and you seek to provide restoration, healing, and a path forward. This is tough. This takes guts. This takes tough empathy. Okay, this means you have the guts to look at the organ, the courage, and say, hey, I know nobody wants to hear this, but we have to have this conversation. Also, I highly recommend anytime you're in any kind of a conflict situation, use the chain. And you did that, and then your chain failed you. There are going to be times when your chain fails you, okay? And then you need to either go on to one of the 3 responses. We've heard fight or flight. You guys have all heard that. Flight is where I just check out. I'm gonna run, I'm gonna change my identity. People that commit suicide, you've heard that, something's too great, I can't bear, I'm gonna run away, okay? Or I'm gonna fight you, I'm gonna sue you, I'm gonna defame you, I'm gonna slander you. Neither one of these, fight or flight, is not an acceptable response for a peacemaking in the organization. What you need in the middle is peacemaking responses, enhanced understanding, negotiation, mediation, healing, restoration. And that's from that group, pacemaker.net. This is what we need. This is not a faith-based thing. This is basic common decency. And I counsel more people to call me with problems, and the first thing I say to them is, have you talked to the person directly with whom you have an issue with? And if the answer is no, I talk to them and say it is so important to go one-on-one to that person, okay? Because when you talk to somebody else about what's going on, bad things happen. You don't give them the chance to hear them out. And even with the bully boss, I'll say, and they'll say to me, you mean I have to go? Yes, you have to, because sooner or later, either with HR, legal, or on a blog, you're going to be talking to somebody about this behavior. Like what happened with that crew chief and me. Give the person the benefit of the doubt. And I have had more people come back to me the next day and say, I want to thank you for that. Guess what? I thought they were just being a jerk. They were completely unaware of how they were being perceived, okay? And like I said, and that is great. I'm using this more in my life because I love to just immediately, well, let's run it up the flagpole and see where this, that's not right. It's not good, it's not healthy, and it doesn't solve problems, and it doesn't give the other person a chance to learn. Because believe it or not, we're pretty smart and self-aware and self-regulated, but a lot of other people on the planet aren't, and they need help with people speaking truth and love to them. Okay, so again, internal integrity, just wrapping this up here. If it's there, your deeds will follow. So I hope today you got some great ideas of how to sharpen your decision-making skills through critical thinking, through ethical decision-making and sense-making. Also, I hope that I gave you some ideas or cues on how to discern who you're dealing with. Who's in your in-group? Who do you who's in your in-group that needs to have less of a voice and less of a power? And then lastly, I hope I gave you some hope and some ideas on how you can come up with some ideas about how you can build an integrous organization that really, like I said, ethics is all about in here. A lot of people think it's from here to here. If you're not dialed in here, you can forget anything that happens because, like we said with the cup of water, it's not going to matter. So I have something else for you guys. Lastly, just to wrap this up, there is a wonderful book called, by Dr. McAdams, called The Power of Personality, The Art and Science of Personality Development. It's an academic textbook, changed my life. One of the things he talks about in that is that we, as leaders, are authors. Now, I've written several books, but you all are writing your life's book right now. And it's so important to reflect back as the author of your life, what do you want your book to read? There's a lot of people that will actually say, write what you want people to say at your funeral, and then you will backwards extrapolate on how you want to live your life, okay? That's also a useful technique. But we'll keep it on the more positive today. The autobiographical reflection. On your table, in the center, is a piece of paper. Could you each grab one? This is our working assignment. This is called a self-reflection exercise. So everybody take a piece of paper, and you can stack your plates in the middle kind of thing. All right, does everybody have a pen? And if not, if you can have one to save the pen. Okay, so the real important thing with life is, learning means nothing if you can't take it and then apply it into your life. Otherwise, it's just hypothetical, right? And we are all highly experiential learners. So we really want to take what we've learned today, and I want you to be able to go back to your organization this afternoon and actually apply something to it. So this is a self-reflection letter. So under the dear, I want you to dear, and I want you to put your name. This is a letter to yourself, okay? So put your name on there, dear. I know it's probably been a long time since you wrote a letter to yourself. Come on, I can see if you've got a pen in your hand or not. I can see if I'm just kidding. Okay, so dear, put that to yourself, all right? The first question I want you to think about is, what are you going to do to increase your critical thinking skills? We had some books up there. We had some different paradigms. Maybe it's listening to a TED Talk. Maybe it's looking at the Ash conformity. But what are you going to do when you go back to your organization? What has really come to your mindset? Because learning is all about unlearning what you thought you knew, which is probably I'm a pretty solid critical thinker, and relearning something new to replace what you thought you already knew. So what are you going to do to increase your critical thinking skills, okay? And what can you do with your team to maybe look at, like I said, it could be listen to a TED Talk, read a book, watch this video again on after it's recorded type thing. Talk to somebody that you maybe think is a great decision maker, and unpack from them, how do you really get to make great decisions? Also, it's really cool to look online, different critical thinking exercises about how people have ended up at a completely false assumption or decision because they made some erroneous assumptions up front. Really good learning environments for your team. Maybe even in your own industry. There's something real world or a current event that is going on that you could take back and say, hey, our sister company or one of our divisions is going through this. How can we unpack this? What do you think we should do? Okay, take a minute. What are you going to do to increase your critical thinking skills? Because your people need you to be an exceptional thinker. And neuroscience is now saying that the brain is just like a muscle. The more you exercise it, the more likely you are to avoid Alzheimer's, senility, and to keep growing. Okay? The brain is a muscle. Okay. Next question. I want you to think about, who do you have that you implicitly trust? Who do you know wants your success more than you? And I also want you to think about, who do you have that probably needs to come out of such influence in your life? And I'm not saying you never speak, please. And if I know Thanksgiving's coming up and we got family gathering, I'm not talking, be mean to some, but I'm talking about who's pouring into your life, or maybe I am, I don't know. Who's pouring into your life, okay? Who's pouring into your life? Who do you have in your life? This is a real gut check. Who do you know, and who, life is all about bandwidth and priorities. And I know when I went to school working on my doctorate, I had to cut out a lot of stuff that no longer had room on my plate for it, because I wanted only the most, I can only be as tremendous as the things coming into me are. Who do you have in your life? Or it could be a mentor that you would like to approach about forming a relationship with. Anything. And it could be personal, professional. A lot of people have mentors for different areas of their life. A spiritual mentor, a financial mentor, anything. And then look at, who do you know? Is it, and sometimes I call them the time sucks, okay? The people that you know, boy, you could get on the phone with them, you could walk away for an hour and they'd still be, this is no value added, okay? And it's important, because we only have a certain amount of moments on this planet, and we only have a certain amount of bandwidth, so we have to keep it good. Also consider, do you have anything going on in any area of your life where you know something isn't quite right? You got that feeling, you lay awake at night and think, and you try and push it aside, but it keeps coming back. Your instinct is telling you something's not quite right. Put that down too. Because there are ways that we can work towards unpacking that and getting better transparency. Because things don't go away. They go underground and then they come back in a bad way. And then lastly, based on what we talked about, how can you empower each of the individuals in your organization to really raise the ethical bar? And maybe it's taking the Kelly followership test. Maybe it's reading an excerpt from Good to Great. Maybe it's whatever. Maybe it's just talking to them about, what does ethics mean to you? Because a lot of people think it's morality, and to really reinforce, what is the culture of ethics? And they will be delighted to know that you're a leader that's going to take that and value that, and also that the expectation is, if something goes horribly wrong and then all of a sudden you tell me you knew about it, guess what? I'm not going to look kindly on that. The expectation is, you see something, you say something. And you want to make sure people understand that. So think about how you would raise the ethical bar in your organization. Okay, remember, this is a letter to yourself. Next, you have to pick an accountability partner, okay? Pick who you are going to share this with and who is going to hold you accountable for it. You thought I was just going to let you get out of here without doing. Nope. You can put me on if you want. I'll give you my email. Because we have a tendency, guys, I am so disciplined, but only if I have an accountability. I've got to have somebody there, because left to my own devices, I'd be living in a van down by the river, okay? You know what I'm saying? I need really somebody to pour into me and keep me, iron sharpens iron, okay? Who do you have? Maybe it's your boss, maybe it's somebody, maybe it's your brother, maybe it's a family member, maybe it's somebody in your organization, maybe it's somebody completely outside the organization, and you can be honest. Okay? Because some of you, if you are the leader, some of the stuff in here, you can't really talk about people because they may think you're talking about them. The word's going to get out. You know, Ben Franklin has a great quote, and he's like, the only way two people can keep a secret is if one of them is dead. Okay? So you want to make sure that you understand. So maybe it's a friend, maybe it's somebody from this Oklahoma Ethics Business Consortium. Okay? All right? And then, this is the most important part, because this is serious stuff. I want you to sign it, and I want you to date it. And I want you to make a commitment to yourself. You see what the penalty is. If you do not do this, that you are foregoing your right to turkey gravy, stuffing, mashed potatoes. Seriously, okay? So I just want you to feel an emphasis, because in 10 days, you can really unpack and get clarity on a lot of these different things, all right? So any questions on that? I wish you all much success. And lastly, I want to thank you all for the opportunity for me to share with you. Please connect with me anytime. There's my email, my website. You call me. I'd love to share with you. And thank you for just the warm welcome, the attention, and thank you for all you do for ethics. I wish you much success in all the things that we talked about. Thank you.